Salve, Regina, Mater misericordiae.
Praise be Jesus Christ. Today we celebrate the feast of St. Dominic, the founder of the Order of Preachers, who was born in the year 1170. And the story is that before his birth, while he was still in the womb, his mother had a dream, and she dreamed that a dog leapt from her womb, and this dog was carrying a torch, and with that torch he seemed to set the earth on fire. This, of course, was just an image of what would be the vocation of St. Dominic and his order, the Order of Preachers, setting the world on fire with the Word of God, being preached especially against heresies. In 1194, when St. Dominic was about 25 years old, he became a premonstratensian canon, that is, following a monk, following the rule of St. Augustine. And he found his particular vocation to found the Order of Preachers one time when he was on a journey through the Pyrenees mountain with one of the other monks. And there he encountered the Cathars, which were a group of heretics, and they weren't just fanatics, but they were well-instructed, intelligent, and cultured men. They were very zealous in what they preached, and they also feigned sanctity. And so St. Dominic was inspired to combat this heresy along with the Albigensian heresy at the time, and he was inspired to combat it by instituting the Order of Preachers. In St. Dominic's own words, he said, "The heretics win proselytes by zealous preaching, by apostolic humility, by austerity, by seeming, it is true, but by seeming holiness. Therefore, zeal must be met by zeal, humility by humility, false sanctity by real sanctity, the preaching of falsehood by the preaching of the truth." And so he continued his work there among the Cathars in the early years of the 13th century, when finally he was inspired to go to Rome and to seek the approval of his new order, to which he gave the motto, Laudare, benedicere, predicare, which means to praise, to bless, and to preach. And it was while he was there at Rome, around the year 1215, that he also met up with St. Francis. And it's really for this reason that the Franciscans celebrate the feast of St. Dominic as a feast instead of simply as a memorial, due to the reciprocal reverence that these two saints had for one another. And it's recounted in the Omnibus of Sources, in the Second Life of Thomas of Celano, this meeting between the two saints. They were both there at Rome, and they were both questioned as to whether or not friars from their order should be elevated to the bishopric. And both of them, of course, in humility declined. And they said, no, that isn't for our friars. And after this meeting with the hierarchy, the church hierarchy, St. Dominic then approached St. Francis and, out of humility and reverence for St. Francis, asked him if he could wear his cord. And St. Francis at first was reluctant, but then acceded to his request and granted St. Dominic his own cord, which St. Dominic then wore underneath his tunic. And for this reason, St. Dominic, although he is the founder of the Order of Preachers, is also honored among the Franciscans as a Chord Bearer. So this is also a great honor for the Franciscan order. St. Dominic also had the desire to merge the two orders into one. And he presented this request to St. Francis, as the words in St. Thomas, or not Saint, but in Thomas of Celano's Second Life, he says, "Blessed Francis, I wish that your order and mine might be made one, and that we might live in the Church according to the same rule." St. Francis, after a little bit of reflection, didn't think that was according to the will of God. And in any case, as St. Francis departed, St. Dominic, again in his great reverence, said, "In truth, I say to you, all other religious ought to follow this holy man Francis. So great is the perfection of his sanctity." And so we see the mutual reverence and respect, St. Francis granting his cord to St. Dominic, and St. Dominic giving his praise with respect to St. Francis. And so we too desire to honor these two lights today, in particular St. Dominic, who worked along with St. Francis in the early 13th century to rebuild the Church. St. Dominic, by his inspired preaching and his work among the heretics, and St. Francis, by his poverty and his preaching of penance and good example. Praise be Jesus Christ.
Fructum ventris tuum.